Come on in.
Thanks very much, Jay. And hi, everyone. My name's Kirsten, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm joining you tonight from Toronto, Canada, where I live. Um, I spend half of my year in a small town in Florida, Palm City, Florida, where I spend my winters. And in both locations, I have strong connections to Alcoholics Anonymous with service positions at both. My few facts here. My sobriety date is January 15th, 1997. I'll be 60 years old in December, and I've been married 30 years. We'll be 31 years married in September of this year. So the first 2 years of marriage were pretty exciting. I was bottoming out and newly married at the same time. I have a sponsor, and I sponsor some beautiful women, and some of those women also sponsor women, and it's sort of this legacy of recovery that I so enjoy being part of. As I mentioned, I also have some regular service commitments. I always have, right from the beginning, when all that I was actually allowed to do was set up chairs. I was ready to say, yes, I want to be accountable to something. And at the end of my drinking, I really wasn't accountable to anything. And I really wanted to change that. So that's worked for me. Service has been a large part of my recovery. And when COVID happened and we went on Zoom, um, my service world expanded even more. I mean, I was very afraid of COVID. I have some autoimmune diseases which precede even my drinking. And when that happens, I remember thinking, how am I going to be okay without being able to go to meetings? And I also don't like technology. So how's this going to work? And how it worked was I had to open my mind to learning some new things. I learned how to be a little bit more adept with the computer, and I fully like locked into these Zoom meetings, and I've come to love them because it really has expanded my universe in AA and in a couple other fellowships. And one of the biggest gifts was, I sponsored this woman for the first 2 years. I'd never met her. She lives in South Africa. And we never met, but we did all of the steps on the phone and on Zoom. And that's kind of a special thing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me start with what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. And I have one sister, younger sister, mom and dad. I think they're all very attractive. My family looked good, and my mom made sure that we were dressed really nicely. And, we were lower middle class, but I think we had access to so many things. I thought we were rich. That's what I thought. Ballet. I got to do any kind of extracurricular activity I wanted to do, and she got me there. But the other thing about this family is that on my dad's side, there is a lot of alcoholism. My dad, he loves Alcoholics Anonymous, I think because he can identify, although he's never called himself an alcoholic. But there's been a lot of consequences of his heavy drinking. And on his side, if you're not alcoholic, you're in need of Al-Anon. So that's sort of how it is on that side. And then on my mom's side, there's some mental health issues, and so that makes an interesting combination. And I also believe that it would have been a great benefit to my mom had she been able to drop some pride and get some help, maybe through Al-Anon or some psychiatric help. But in any event, as kids, I was very sensitive to what was going on in the family. And I also, for some reason, felt a great responsibility for making sure that everything was okay. And that started really young. Nobody told me that I was in charge. I just kind of felt I needed to be. And control has been a huge theme in my life. So I started, when my dad was starting to stray, and he's had many relationships, some of them while he was married to my mom, some of them while he's been married to other women. And there's kind of chaos. And when he first left, I did feel that I needed to parent my parents, not just my dad, but especially my mom, because she'd go off to work and she could do her job during the day, but I felt that she fell apart when she came home at night, and I wanted to protect her and make sure she was okay. So I stepped in, and one memory I have that um, is telling for me too. I think when I was around 8 or 9, I did a lot of house cleaning. I kept the house really clean because I thought if the house was clean, she'd be okay when she got home from work. And one time in cleaning, I was cleaning out her dresser drawers and I found a card, and it was her dramatic writings, I guess, to herself. But it said something to the effect of, if it weren't for my kids, I'd kill myself. And I took that on as being true. And so it was my responsibility to be okay, make sure things were okay, or she was going to be dead. And that stuck with me. So besides the control, the other hallmark I can remember is I really was looking for love. And I just almost was insatiable. I couldn't get the love that I wanted. And even though I had friends and other people in my life, the love I thought I needed, it had to come from my dad, and it had to come from my mom, and it had to be a certain way, or I wasn't going to be okay. And of course, that just set me up for a world of disappointment, but also resentment, and also a lot of fear that I wasn't going to get what I needed. Um, I did really well in school. I did great in sports. I kind of looked like I was keeping things together. Life moved on, and this part of my story is I don't have any shame that I'm an alcoholic, but for some reason I still harbor shame that I have a serious mental illness called anorexia, and I was diagnosed with that when I was around 13 or 14. And back then, basically I knew that I had to be okay taking care of myself. My mom couldn't deal with it, my dad was too busy. And I just was like, all right, so you tell me I have this illness, and don't worry about it, I'm going to continue on. And I just white knuckled through. I continued to get great grades. I continued to compete in sports and do great. And that disease grew and progressed, and started to cause consequences. And the longer I was sick, the more the consequences came. And in terms of things like, anemia, amenorrhea. So, there was like, you can't have kids. You're probably never going to be able to have kids. And I was like, it doesn't matter. I don't want them anyways, because I'm going to law school. And, and then in my early 20s, and this is all kind of before drinking, I was told I had osteoporosis. At like 20, you have the bones of an 85-year-old. And I was like, whatever, I got a track meet this weekend, so thanks for the info. And I also think that with that, on the few occasions when I did allow myself to drink, like with some of my friends, I loved it. I loved the escape. It let me let go of that control, and I just felt almost free. But the next morning I had to dial it back into the truth, which is I needed to be responsible, in control, large, and in charge. And I had to move on and put that drinking aside. And so I did that. I went off to law school and graduated top of my class. I'm now in my early 20s, and also found out that I had Hashimoto's and Raynaud's, and those two are, they're diseases to do with autoimmunity and whatever. I managed to put myself into greater denial, or if it ever occurred to me that I was feeling scared about that truth, I just drank more. And I, I'm thinking of, did I have fun drinking? Yeah, a few times I did. There are a few instances where it was fun and glamorous, but I don't really have a ton of that. Most of my drinking was more just to get the effect. And by the time I really let go into my drinking, I couldn't do it in front of people that I knew, right? Like it had to be a secret because I didn't want them to know how much I had to drink. And, in a few occasions, I know they were baffled by how fast I was polluted with alcohol. And the reason why was because I had alcohol in my purse when we would go out for dinner. Like I'd have a glass of wine with the people at dinner, but I'd have all these little Mickeys of vodka in my purse because I needed that. And so after a glass of wine, people were baffled, like, why is she so loaded? And then they would just say, well, it's because she's so small and that's all it is. But little did they know what I was up to. And secrecy, like again, hiding. And this is where I think the disease starts to take over. I got a job in a firm that their motto was Davies, Ward and Beck, the sweatshop with the difference. And I was all for that. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna like work my ass off. And even though I'm totally afraid and I'm extremely, extremely insecure, I'm just gonna pretend that I'm okay and do this job. And the thing is that with that fear, the weekends were now, I was kind of like an adult. I started doing adult things on the weekend, and that meant going for dinners and drinking. And at first it was Friday evenings and Saturday evenings. And then very quickly I added, Sunday was brunch, Chinese food for dinner, Chinese food, Sunday night dinner meant wine. The Sunday during the day brunch was mimosas and Bloody Caesars. That's a Canadian thing. Bloody Marys for Americans. And it's just like I was starting to allow my world to revolve around alcohol. And Thursday nights ended up being. I used to date a guy in the restaurant business, and he said, the tourists come out on weekends. The real people, the real restaurant goers are the ones who come Thursday nights. So I added Thursday night. That was the night to go to dinner and drink. And then it was just every night. It was just every night. And my health continued to deteriorate while my drinking increased. And when I started to practice law, I went to a tax firm, Stikeman Elliott. Again, just even more fear, even more like, I don't know why I'm here because I hate everything about this job and I'm afraid and scared and I don't identify with these people and I have to do it anyways. And I just want to drink more. And at that firm, because of my health, I ended up asking for a leave of absence to go into hospital and treat the eating disorder. And I still didn't think I was alcoholic. I didn't know I had a problem with alcohol yet. My denial was so huge. And making the decision to go in a hospital, the biggest barrier to that was I wasn't going to be able to drink while inpatient. So it's kind of like when someone's told, you need a triple bypass. And they say, well, I'm not sure about that because I have to have wine with my dinner. That was me. Look, I'm not sure about this because I don't like the idea that I'm not going to be able to drink. Anyways, I went in a hospital, did a little bit of that, and I left against medical advice. And the thing that I learned there was you know, what that being in hospital was about behavior modification, nothing to do with spirituality. And I should mention, throughout my youth, I was always seeking, always seeking. We didn't grow up with any religion or spirituality, but I had friends that I gravitated towards. Jewish friends. I went to all their bar mitzvahs. I went to Jewish camp and I learned the Hebrew prayers and I loved it. I had a friend that was Baha'i. We ran track together and I wanted to know all about what that was, you know, always seeking. And part of this treatment at Toronto General, none of it had to do with anything spiritual. And so all I did was I changed my behavior. I got angrier. I was scared more, and I left hospital. And I said, you know what? This is what I need to change. I need to do something else and get another degree. I'm not ready to go back to the law firm. And so I went back to school and I kept drinking and I drank more and I got another degree, graduated University of Toronto in education, top of my class again. And now I was really on a run for drinking. I was drinking like every day. And at that point, I was now engaged with who would become my husband. I love this guy, but he was also in denial about my drinking. And he's from a family of alcoholics, a mother that, well, she's a member of Al Anon. And, you know, and I don't want to judge where he's at with his alcoholism, but let's just say there's a lot of hallmarks there. And we got together and we got married. And I spent the last year and a half of my drinking telling the law firm that I really didn't think that it was going to be a good idea for me to come back because now I was going to be a full-time housewife. And what I really was a full-time drunk. And I don't even know if I loved my husband at that time or whether he was just a convenience. I think I loved him. I'm not sure. But I would come to find out the truth about that as I got sober and stayed sober. So I started hitting bottom. And in 1996, I call that my year in the woods. I spent some time at Domwood, Homewood, and then what was the other one? There was another woods in there, but they were all treatment centers. And I was being sent to one after another. And I went there because I wanted to be a good girl. I didn't want these consequences. I hated what I was doing with drinking. I hated that my mom had she had to have surgery for breast cancer, and with every intention in that morning of her surgery, I left the house to go and visit her, but I had to stop at noon and have a couple drinks before going into the hospital. I never made it to see her, of course, right? That's what happened. And so I wanted to stop that, but I was really afraid of taking away the alcohol. And so I spent my summer doing that. I started to find out a little bit about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. But again, I was, you know, on a path to be good and loved. And I wanted to be the best student and the best client of Homewood. And I wasn't ready to tell the truth. I wasn't ready to ask for help. So I kept drinking. And on my last trip back to Homewood, what I had done is actually left. I escaped, and that one was a little bit interesting because I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, and my husband got a call at the office, and the police were involved because they didn't know where I was. What I'd done is I was in Guelph, and I wanted to go home, so I got a cab and I had the cab stop at the liquor store and got a bottle and had the cab drive me to Toronto. And when I got home, and that, you know, this is back 30 something years ago, so we didn't have all these cell phones and things, and got home and called my husband, and he was like beside himself. He's like, "Where the hell are you?" I'm like, "I'm home." And by then I'd had some drinks, so I was feeling pretty good. And he's like, "The police are calling me." And anyways, long story short, he negotiated with them that he would bring me back, and you know, and I would I would go back into treatment, and he did. He brought me back, and I was put in a room where they locked me in, and they took my shoelaces, and that really pissed me off too. I was really annoyed about that because for 2 days I was under observation, and I was angry. But when they let me out, I was like, okay, maybe things are getting a little bit more serious. And I was enjoying the AA meetings. At Homewood, we had to go to a meeting every night, and we had to go to 5 on weekends. And that's the first place that I actually felt some help. When I went into an AA meeting, I brought a wardrobe to treatment, by the way, because I figured if I looked good, you wouldn't know I was sick. And so I dressed up to go to that AA meeting, and you know, AA is they can see right through that. So somebody was like, "Welcome. Can we get you a half cup of coffee and sit you down here?" And I started listening, and I was like, "These people, they understand my drinking," and I had just that tiny bit of hope that they really got it. They understood, and that maybe somehow what was working for them could work for me too. Now, my pride was still pretty huge because I kept hearing the Serenity prayer. And even though I had all this academic stuff going on in the background, by that point, my brain was so riddled, I couldn't even remember the prayer. But, for sure, I wasn't going to ask anyone. I never asked to write it down. And I make a point now, especially when I go into treatment centers, or, I've done some service in jails. I'm like, if you don't know the Serenity prayer, please tell me. I want to write it out for you because it's the best prayer that I've ever learned. And I don't want people to miss out for the pride that I had that I wouldn't ask for help with that. Anyways, I left Homewood. Still, I got home and drank again that weekend. It was a long weekend in September, and my family now, my dad and whatever wife he had, and my mom, whoever she was with then, they were all like, and Vince, they're like, where are we going to send you now? And I said, I just want to do AA. I really did feel there was something there for me. And I started going to the meetings in Toronto, and very lucky here in Toronto, there isn't a wavy line between, is this a spiritual program or a religious one? It's spiritual. And I'm grateful for that, because if it had come across as a religious one, I'm not sure that my ego wouldn't have said, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm also grateful that we had so many meetings, and in the Toronto area, there are meetings everywhere, every day, morning, noon, evening. And we have a good subway system. So when I didn't want to drive, I could get places by subway and bus, and I could take a taxi. And I was always reminded too, when I wanted to be frugal and in a snowstorm, not go to a meeting because I was afraid to drive, my sponsor would be like, and how much would you spend in a snowstorm getting your booze? Really? And I'd be like, yeah, I guess I can afford a $20 cab ride to the welcome group tonight. There was like no excuse. But anyways, I went to this meeting on that Labor Day weekend, and I heard a man speak, and you can imagine too, my marriage was like, Vince was just working. He was really in denial, and I know underneath it, he was super angry and probably incredibly afraid of what he had married and what I was doing to my life and my state of health. So there wasn't a lot of communication, but my mother and father both had always been, it's one of the things where they both modeled to me that a quick fix is to get attention from men or women, and that can make you feel better. And so I saw this man speak, and he was tall and handsome, and AA, they say attraction, not promotion, and I was like, I'm attracted. And so I went up to him after the meeting, and I was like, I just got out of treatment, and I'm so sick, and I'm just back, and I really want to get sober. And he was real AA, and he said, you know what, great, let me introduce you to someone. He was so on with how AA ideally works, no 13th stepping baloney. He was like, women with women, men with men, and let me introduce you to this woman. And he did. And I met a woman, her name's Colleen. She's 8 years sober. She took me out front. We sat on a park bench. I'm bawling my eyes out. And she kind of took charge. God was working in my life. And, no coincidences here, because come to find out that Tony and Colleen are married. So that attracted man is her husband. He'd been married sober 11 years. And they end up being the first couple that my husband and I know who practice the 12 steps. And Tony was a guy that Vince could actually talk to. Vince had a lot of shame, I think, in saying I need help or anything about like what it's like to have an alcoholic wife. And God just put that out there. So Colleen's like, I'm going to be your sponsor, and these are the things that I want you to do. You need to pray if you can. And what that looks like is, even if you don't feel a connection, get on your knees in the morning, ask for help, get on your knees at night, ask for help. And I'm like, all right, I'll do it. It was just like one more thing to do. She said, you need to be in service and you need to join a home group. You're going to join mine because we do a lot of service there and we'll get you in a position. We need to read the big book. You need to be at a meeting every day. She's like, you don't have anything going on right now. Your full-time job is drinking. So let's get busy with the meetings. She said, yeah, she appointed herself as a sponsor. She goes, I want you to call me every day. And I especially want you to call me if you think you're going to pick up a drink. And we're going to do the steps together. And I'm like, yeah, I'm on board with all that, except that last thing, which was call me if you're thinking of taking a drink. And I spent my first 6 months in Alcoholics Anonymous getting sober for about 3 or 4 weeks, doing everything that was suggested. I hadn't done inventory yet. So I had a lot on my mind. I had a lot of resentments and a lot of harm that I had done that was weighing heavily on me. And around 3 or 4 weeks, things were straightening it out for me and my brain started getting busy. And immediately I'd be like, I don't want to deal with this stuff. And I get thirsty. And I wouldn't tell anyone, because being this perfectionist, thinking that if I was feeling like I needed to drink, then I was doing something wrong in AA, and I better not tell anyone. So I didn't. And within 24 hours, I'd be drunk again. And fortunately, I survived those weekends of getting drunk and coming back to AA. And I remember in that home group that I went to, I'd always go, I'd pick up my new white chip and I go and I'd tell the secretary of my new dry date. And this woman, she was kind, but also pretty straightforward. She said, Kirsten, I'm really glad that you're so honest and you're picking up this chip, but it'd be really nice if I could write your dry date in pen rather than pencil. I was like, that's kind of mean, but I get it, Anyways, the last drunk was in January, sometime early in that month. My husband had said, let's go to California. I was like 4 or 5 weeks sober. My sponsor, very different personality than me. She was like, yeah, go. Like, there's meetings everywhere. You can go to great meetings there. It'll be good for you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm on board with this. But I wasn't being honest. I was totally terrified. And sitting in the plane before we even took off, I started bawling my eyes out because I knew I'd get drunk on that trip. And I did. We landed in San Francisco and, 3 days in, I ditched my husband saying, I'm going to go for a swim. And I went to the bar and I got drunk. And I drank the rest of that trip. I don't remember a lot of it. I do remember being back on the plane, going back to Toronto. And I wanted one of the airline employees to announce, is there anyone in this plane that's in AA? Because there's a woman here that needs help. I was desperate. And we got home. And at that point, I really was willing to go to any lengths. I left my pride on the floor. I was like, I'm not going to be traveling anywhere anytime soon. Making my husband happy and pleased about being able to travel no longer matters. I put my sobriety even ahead of him and even ahead of all my good girl stuff. It was like, I got to get sober first. And I dug in. And, so what did that look like? That looked like tons of meetings. And that looked like leveling my pride, that when people were like, so when are you going to go back and do law again? I was like, I don't know, maybe never. And and even to my family to say that, they're like, what? You can't be saying that, because they took a lot of mileage off what I was doing. And I thought, until I got to AA, I thought that was all that mattered for me. And it was a long time in AA before I learned that God loves me just exactly as I am. I don't have to prove anything to God to get love. It's just there. All I have to do is be open to it. So that first year, I think around 3 months in, I did the third step prayer with my sponsor, and I made a decision to do step 4. I didn't make any decision about who God was or what God was. I was like, I believe in AA and I'm ready to do the next step. And I really needed to, because I had resentments like galore and I was ready to write. And I remember this woman came up to me and, she said, I heard you doing step 4 already. You're going to get drunk. You better watch out for that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm getting drunk anyways. I might as well try. And I started writing inventory. And the first people on that, mom, dad, husband, sister, legal profession, fashion industry, anything to do with women and body image. And just like it was, I didn't have to go digging. It was all there and I wrote it down. And the magic of that is I started to find out that, especially with my confusion over men and relationships that I had, that a lot of it was my choosing. I put myself in positions to be harmed. And that was something that I was responsible and accountable for. Now, I'm not responsible for being born into a family that couldn't address my needs health-wise or mentally when I was a kid, but I am responsible for carrying on that resentment as long as I did. And I am responsible for saying, you know what, now I'm ready to start asking God to help me let that go and to be willing to accept people, places, and things exactly as they are, and not that beat them up for being who they are and not who I want them to be. And, I certainly didn't have that clarity after my first fifth step, but I was moving forward. And I also recognized that a lot of the reason I was so angry was because I was really deep down very afraid of losing people. And in terms of, my physical well-being, I stayed in denial about any fear over that, probably until I was between 7 and 10 years sober. I wasn't even going to look at that. So my first 7 years, I loved sponsoring people. I was busy in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got opportunities to do a lot of speaking and service and sponsoring. But you know what? I was also using that as a way to avoid some real truths about myself. And at 7 years sober, and at home, things were better because I wasn't getting drunk, but my husband was still really angry and it was coming out sideways at me. And at 7 years, I hit a second bottom that it was almost harder than that. Like the first two, the first I would say is the one where I called my sponsor, said I need help. That was cracking through. The second was when I did that fifth step inventory and started seeing me for me. And the third bottom, which hurt more than those two, because now I'd been sober for 7 years, was that one where I found out I had kidney disease. My husband and I needed to separate, and just a lot was going on. And that was where it was either God is everything or God is nothing. I knew I could drink again, or I could hit my knees and see what was missing in my program. And what was missing was steps 3, 7, and 11. And in that, things started to change for me. And I started to be able to leave the fears behind and come into a place where I could start accepting myself and asking for more outside help that I needed, and stop worrying about what all you thought of me. A slogan I like is Q-tip, quit taking it personally. I just stopped, and in terms of judgment, I can be judgmental, but I try to be judge gentle now. And and I know that there are people in these rooms who judge. I know it's true. And I'm like, if that's happening, so what? It's not my job to fix it. It's not my job to educate. If someone wants to get sober and they're having an issue with anything that I've said, so, set it aside, go listen to some other speaker, find out something else that's going to be the truth, that's going to work for you. But I don't need to incorporate it into, my heart and think that it's a tag on me. Keep it simple. I like that KISS symbol of, I've heard it say, keep it simple, stupid. I like keep it simple, sweetheart. I don't want to keep battling myself, and I think for the first many years, I would take that step 10 and I do it with a bat. I just beat myself up. I'd be like, I couldn't do the second side of the balance sheet. I'd be like, all these things I did bad. And then, not like, okay, what good things did I do today? Well, that doesn't really matter. I just did all these things bad. And then somewhere between 10 and 15 years sober, I was like, you know what? I think I want to do this with a feather instead of a bat, and just be a little softer to myself. And during this period, moving on, I also, part of my journey, and God guided me, was I ended up going to Adult Children of Alcoholic. I did the Big Red Book. I did the steps there. I learned some more about my family disease. And I also picked up Al-Anon, and I started learning more there about, I didn't cause anybody else's illness. I can't cure it and I can't control it, but I sure can contribute to it. And I wanted to stop doing that. And that's something that I started to do. And, just learning that, I think, helped me to become a better sponsor, because a few of the women I was sponsoring, I still had reservations about life choices that they were making. And I was able to go, you know what? It's not about that. It's about, you can get sober under any circumstances. And all I'm supposed to do, I'm not supposed to tell you, is it a good idea to go through with the pregnancy when, you're unwed and you're 2 months sober and the baby daddy's in treatment. And
10 minutes.
If you're going to do that, I'm going to support you as best as possible to get sober, so that at least you and that baby is going to have a chance. And I laid off, and I just stayed responsible for what I was there for. And traditions tell me I'm to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's what I do. And so that was very helpful. And I think as a result, I have been able to be maybe a better sponsor, knowing my limitations and knowing, where to say, can't help you with that. And I really encourage you to get the help you need on that level. I think there's another thing about carrying around anger in my heart. That's step 8 and 9. I tried to make my amends to my mom and dad. I think my dad, I was ready to do it. I went to him and I apologized for all the fear and dishonesty and things that I had done. And, right away it was like, well, thank you for that. And I've made mistakes too. I went to my mom and she basically said, well, thank you for realizing how hard it's been to be your mother, because it's really hard. And, and she went on about how challenging I am. And so I got another resentment. And what did I do with that? I had to go right back to step 8 again. And between that 10 years of praying for forgiveness, getting into ACOA and Al-Anon, and really letting go, God had me in the place where I could have forgiveness for her. And I'll mention this is that, there was a plan there, because when her husband died, it was it's almost 8 years ago now. It was clear that he'd been covering for her. She has dementia, and her, being as prideful as I am, was like, I'm fine, get away from me. And I had to step in. I had to be an adult, and I had to take her annoyance on the chin and just say, I'm gonna have to start making some decisions to keep you safe. And I was able to do that with love. Now, if I hadn't had that forgiveness piece, I don't know how 8 years later, now that she doesn't even know who I am, and it's a long goodbye. It breaks my heart. I have so much empathy for her, a woman that prided herself on how she looked, and everything about her was the vision, and she can't do any of that anymore. And I just feel for her and love her so much. And I would never have had that without accepting God in my heart. And in terms of my dad, he's doing his thing. I don't see him a lot, because it's not that safe to be around him. When I see him, I keep myself in fit spiritual condition, and I have empathy for the disease that he has and he's in denial of. My husband and I, after that separation, I had a good time. I got back to dating men, and I started thinking, like, I can be a little more confident. And it was a good experience. But you know what? At the end of the day, even after a marriage proposal, this one guy, my mom and a few other people were like, that's your ticket, because he was really wealthy. And I was like, great. But I remember meeting up with him, and I just knew. I was like, if I stay with this guy, I'm gonna have to drink. And that was the end of that. I was like, I just ended that engagement. And a year or so later, my husband and I were back together. That year, when I had my birthday, he gave me a new engagement ring. And he took the old one back and he gave the new one. And he said, I'm giving this to you because you're a new person, Kirsten. You're not the woman that I married. You're a new woman. And this symbolizes that to me. And that mattered a lot. And he had to get his own help too, because what he realized was he was no longer angry at me and my drinking and all of that. He had some of his own stuff to deal with. And thank you, God, that I married such a beautiful man that could go and do his own digging, and come back. And again, there's a huge level of acceptance in this relationship. Um,
Five
what else?
minutes.
Okay, so let's see. I still remember on a daily basis, my ego is not my amigo, constantly chipping away at that so that I can ask for help. I take myself lightly with humor. I've accepted some limitations, and they keep coming, because the consequences of being so sick as a young girl at 60, they're really starting to hit. But I'm grateful for them. I'm deaf in one ear. I have partial hearing in this one. I don't have any teeth. They've all fallen out, but I have great dentures, and I'm grateful for those dentists that has helped me out there. Let's see, the God of my understanding. I heard this story. This is a good one, because the God of my understanding, is I get to choose what God is. And I heard a story about a little girl in kindergarten, and her teacher says, you're all supposed to draw something. And she comes up to the little girl and says, what is that you're drawing? And she goes, I'm drawing God. And the teacher goes, you can't draw God. Nobody knows what God looks like. And the little girl goes, they will soon, and keeps drawing. And that's the God of my understanding. I get to choose, and my God is a loving God that just says, I see you, I love you for exactly as you are. Nobody has to understand you beyond me. I do. And I really do believe you're trying to do your best. And with that, I continue to sponsor. I continue to help others, reach out, open myself up for opportunities. I do my yoga, I do my weightlifting. I was at the ballet last night enjoying a beautiful performance. I love movies. I'm not deep on everything. I always thought if it's not deep, it's not worthy. I like reading People magazine, and I definitely like reading The Grapevine because that's like People magazine for AA. And if you don't know what that is, I'll tell you more about it another time. And the last thing I'll say, because this is really important, it's 24-hour day book, and January 6th. It says, keeping sober is the most important thing in my life. The most important decision I ever made was my decision to give up drinking. And I believe that to be true. And the way that I stay sober and sane emotionally, step 10 and 11, that's my triangle. And prayer, meditation, and self reflection. And I'm grateful that you asked me to come and share a little bit with you tonight. My name's Kirsten, and I'm an alcoholic.
Yay.